Section 23. The Cognate. 200 Millennium 43 to 992 Millennium 48. The triumphant death howl of the Emperor upon his destruction was a grand gale of psychic force. As with the first age of strife, psychers sprang up with ever-increasing frequency. It was said not a single world in the galaxy didn't have a psyker living upon its surface. Many were cruelly murdered by the ignorant of their now fully isolated primal worlds. Often, the reverse was true. Psychers rose up to drown their worlds in madness and blood. The black ships visited worlds less and less frequently, eventually by Millennium 46, ceasing their rounds entirely. Thus, the psyker epidemic was further exasperated. Demons and other warped devils took advantage. Hundreds of worlds, both within petty imperiums and beyond, were utterly consumed by ravening warp energies, capering demons, and all manner of heinous things. Vampires openly rose up on a dozen planets, draining thousands upon thousands of people dry, their eternal thirst for psychic sustenance unbearable. Mindwalkers and psychonuan wasps spread from world to world, as crotalids migrated in ever greater numbers. On one world, the warp was so disturbed it was claimed that an element of the Nex. Journal author begins vomiting, babbling in language untranslatable by cogitators. Servitors on standby. Subject recovers. And the entire sector was utterly removed from existence. Luckily, the vile essence of the deep warp did not crop up again throughout the entire period. We can only pray it never does. Anyway, even as the petty imperiums squabbled and made war against one another, and as Xenos rogues and chaotic armies rampaged across the Milky Way, this subtle increase of psychers caused untold damage beyond the realization of these ignorant little empires and power magnates. Though with every rule, there is an exception. Upon the world of San Vagar, there had always been a tradition of psychic discipline. When the warp was thrown into turmoil, this discipline was kept intact. Though their astropaths and navigators died, or went mad, the disciplined psyker priests of the world did not go berserk, and in fact, managed to bring the newly created psychers under their control, saving the planet from destruction. This, unfortunately, was to not last. Some claimed it was a demon virus, spread by a traveling troupe of Nurglich cultists disguised as pleasure girls who were prevalent across the world, traveling across national and cultural boundaries seemingly at will. Whatever the cause, the virus began to kill everything on the planet, spreading from the crotch outwards, rotting the victims internally as they screamed, aghast at their fates. Only the psyker monks managed to stave off corruption. Their minds drove away the demon virus, pulverizing the microscopic demons which surged invisibly across the entire planet. Some were consumed physically. Such was their psychic might that their minds impossibly remained, disembodied and screaming silently. Most managed to seal themselves within their towers, fashioning wards of unimaginable power. The demon virus, frustrated at being denied, possessed the countless dead of the planet, fashioning itself a host of billions. The army of corpses assailed their magical towers for decades, until the warp energy accumulated by the virus dissipated and the demon was banished, leaving a world of corpses. The priests vowed that this would never happen again. They saw that the plague as a sign. Psychers were the future of humanity, and only they were worthy. Across the warp, they pooled their powers and sent out a message to any witches or psychics in range. The Cognate is come! Gather at San Vagar. Bring only your mind and your magics. The future starts now. Over the next few decades, psychers of varying powers and specialties began to arrive. Some had stolen tiny transport craft, using their own powers to guide them through the Sea of Souls. Others chartered ships who became becalmed or lost in the warp, leaving the psychers to escape in pods. Some had banded together and traded for a vessel and collectively piloted it to the planet. Thousands of psychers came. Then came the trials. The first was the planet itself. Swirling with despairing souls, the psychers had to travel through the mountains of rotten dead to reach the towers. Many went insane, many did not. The second was the corruption trial. The priests tested each psyker who came, scrying through their minds with their powerful abilities. Those who were corrupt were destroyed. When the trials were complete, the Cognate began to take shape as a series of tiers that made up the ranks of the psychic organization. The first tier were the oldest and/or most powerful members of the Cognate, the original priests, the alpha-level psychers and above, and some of the most powerful psyker wraiths. The second tier ranged from the beta psychers down to the delta levels. Beneath them were all the rest. The third tier. The first tier decided upon topics of research and judged the others. The second tier did research and gathered power and sorcerous magics. The third tier did the grunt work, serving the upper tiers, maintaining the towers, and forming the Saccharin, an army of warrior psychers to defend the Cognate using a combination of captured PDF weapons and their own warp-spawned powers. The centuries wore on, and the Cognate turned all its sorcery, knowledge, and unthinkable power to learning and developing their understanding of the warp and their powers. Devices were fashioned and artifacts crafted in the deep vaults of the Cognate's towers. As a soul is a firefly flickering in the warp, the world of the Cognate was a vast, unreal sun, blazing with soulfire and leeching ever more energy from the warp. Demons and angels flocked around the world like a warp-spawned miasma. Only the titanic wards crafted by the founders kept the madness at bay, locked behind a colossal conceptual wall of hexes and runes. Words and whispers traveled across the churning sea of chaos through the realm of the soul. Rumors became literal beasts which scampered through the madness, bringing their diabolical message to any who had the power to comprehend it. Languishing in his realm of crystal and glass, the message beings gathered around the great red sorcerer's warp-bound listening horn. Magnus, the vast lord of the thousand suns, became aware of this clan of psychers. He looked upon their world through his singular warp sight, and he grew envious. He must possess their knowledge. In 992, Millennium 46, after centuries of fraught travel, through the even more insane and hazardous warp, visitors arrived upon Sun Vagar. The Cognate became aware of them when a vessel inscribed with curious, forbidden runes entered orbit above their world. Within that same week, a party of 9 landed upon the Psyker world. These 9 passed across the surface of the world without being driven insane by the howling wraiths. When they reached the gates of the 66 towers of the Cognate, they unbelievably bypassed the powerfully warded barriers, their sorcery allowing them to step through a shimmering portal directly into the central hall of the Cognate, to the astonished gasps of the Psyker Lords themselves. Before them stood 9 towering giants, bedecked in glimmering gold and blue plates. 8 of the party stood perfectly still, their hollow helmets staring impassively as they held their bolters perfectly still. The 9th was obviously a sorcerer, his armor even more ostentatious than his comrades', his staff held loosely in his heavy gauntlets. This was Lord Severinus, the latest in line of chief librarians of Magnus's personal cabal of heathen warp channelers and psychers. Arrogantly, he addressed the Cognate's leaders directly, ignoring protocol entirely. "My dear witch doctors and soothsayers," he was said to have uttered, "my lord Magnus the Omniscient, the Red Cyclops of all knowledge, has looked upon your great works and is impressed. Should you wish it, he would gladly allow your highest thinkers into his own great cabal. All that he asks for in return is knowledge. Is this not a grand and merciful gift?" The second tier were outraged, and the psychers had to concentrate in order to repress such murderous thoughts. The grim hooded figures of the Council of 66, the greatest of all the Cognate, were quiet. Of course, none of the Cognate truly spoke verbally anymore, but even their minds were silent, as they considered the disgusting proposal of Severinus. Eventually they responded, as a single voice, or dread power. "His god is not our god, and his authority does not hold sway here. Begone, insect!" At this, it was said Severinus erupted into a fit of hysterical laughter. Not his realm. The Lord of all change has dominion over all things. Think not that even you, walled up in your towers, are unassailable. Reconsider, or you shall surely perish. By the very well of eternity, your cognate shall fall without my master. Again the cognate dismissed him. In a fit of rage, his patience exhausted, Severinus lashed out with his venomous mind, striking at the leader of the cognate himself. Suddenly the central hall was in an uproar and madness, as the thousand suns turned their bolters upon the surrounding witches and psychers, who in turn lashed out with their own powers. Severinus was a tornado of power, arcs of blue and pinkish fire erupting from him in devastating arcs of lightning, and blazing darkness poured from his talon-tipped gauntlets. Bodies were blown apart by gunfire, Astartes were blasted to pieces or forcibly banished from the hall, and warp power flowed like oil throughout the room. But while Severinus was a tornado, the lords of the cognate were as hurricanes. Mechavo, a master pyrrhikine, speared warp fire across the evil sorcerer, burning him to his very soul. Lord Severinus hissed in utter agony, only just managing to teleport from the hall and back to his waiting ship in orbit. Back upon his vessel, his own cabal of sorcerers, both human and Thousand Sons, began to weave their own devastating magics in response. While they prepared, the Astartes strike cruiser unleashed a barrage of scorching bombardment shells upon the 66 towers of the cognate. Yet, even as the munitions neared, invisible forces plucked them from reality or crushed them in midair, detonating them harmlessly miles above the towers. The powers of the cognate were mighty indeed. Then the Thousand Sons unleashed their sorcerous return fire. Like two ships dueling in the void, the two cabals battled across the psychic plane, unleashing hellish powers and terrible energies upon each other. Mewling spawn monsters were created which battered the towers, only to be destroyed by dozens of vortex portals. Wraiths were weaponries, some were banished. Over 6 years, the two psychic forces fought each other to near exhaustion. The cognate would land the final decisive blow. A great warp-borne wind swept impossibly across the void, buffeting the entire starship away from their world and forcing it to enter the warp against its will. Severinus, howling curses, was denied. Little more than a charred skeleton supported by scorched, enchanted power armor. Severinus looked like the face of death as he fled back to his master in disgrace. It seemed as if the cognate had defeated Severinus' prophecy and had survived. However, the war had taken its toll. The cognate found that its numbers dwindled over the following 2,000 years. Null ships would sneak into their territories, and greedy bounty hunters and mercenaries would steal psychic children from their beds to be sold into slavery for the many petty imperiums who paid handsomely for cognate-trained psychers. Demons constantly assailed them from the abyss, desperate to devour the succulent souls within their hard shell. Likewise, Chaos warbands, eager to test their mettle, would constantly send warriors to assail the world, stretching the power of the saccharine wafer thin, as they fought off threat after threat. As with all empires in the second age of strife, they were gradually eroded like a tide erodes a beach. No matter their power, they were not all powerful. Desperate for new recruits and new blood, the cognates sent out ambassadors across the warp, blindly hoping these ambassadors would bring new recruits or hire themselves out to local imperiums. However, few ever returned. Most were simply killed in the warp, as without the Astronomicon, long-distance travel was essentially suicide. Those that survived often found they did not wish to make the return journey, and instead offered their services to anyone who could offer them security or pay. Often, they were simply enslaved or tortured. A scant few were employed by powerful lords of entire petty imperiums, or became captains of great vessels. Meanwhile, the cognate became weary and distressed. The second tier became disillusioned with the top tier, and many civil wars erupted intermittently, costing yet more lives they simply could not spare. Eventually, in 992, Millennium 48, when a group of the League of the Purge entered the system, the Psychers, most of whom were now just second tier or lower, were unable to prevent the Purge from callously launching multiple virus bomb assaults upon the world, utterly killing everyone. Such is the price of hope in the post-imperial galaxy.